Unfortunately, didn't take video during the initial setup of the warm air balloon. However, I did take some still shots so we can sort of piece together the process based on that, and then I'll just narrate it. So the area that we used was kind of off to the side of the campus near the parking lot. And this was a little bit out of the way so that it wouldn't interfere too much with the other activities. The construction process actually spanned several days, and they were mostly sunny. We had an easy up to work under. Initially, the actual prop could be kept under the easy up, but eventually it became too big for that, and we just kept tools in the work easy up. So the first step was throw down a 4x8 sheet of chipboard, and then that would provide a flat base on which to work. And then we put together the A-frame support system. These are basically just equilateral triangles with a horizontal connection between them. And the initial ports had an X brace on them, but later we replaced those. After that, the next step was to add the lift mechanism, which consisted of 8 foot. It was 2x8, and which pivot in the middle, basically a seesaw, and attached the basket to one end. Then we did some initial testing to make sure that the basket lifted okay, which it did. The basket and the pivot points on the support A-frame are used bearing. They're rated at pretty high weight. We overspec the bearing so that there wouldn't be any safety issues. Okay, then we applied a little bit of counterweight so that the basket would be lifted up fairly easily. After the basket was in place, then the next step was to add the support frame and structure for the balloon. To do that, we used 4 sections of 10-foot half-inch EMT, and first we drilled a hole near the end of the EMT so that a zip tie would later. Then we added a PVC ring, and basically it consisted of 4 pieces of half-inch PVC T connectors in between them. And the idea was that the T would hold the PVC ring together, but also slip over the EMT. So we drilled a hole in each of the T connectors and then zip tied it to the top of the EMT to hold it in place. And so this provides a porture balloon when it becomes attached later. So the balloon was fabricated off-site and then brought to the location. We added the blower on top of the platform there, and then we connected the intake valve from the balloon onto the blower. Did a brief inflate test, and as it turns out, I can't measure very well. PVC rim was too big, so I had to take it down, trim it, put it back. After that, it fit quite well. Unfortunately, there were a few snags of the balloon along the way, and so we had to do a little bit of patching up. No big deal. That balloon is fairly easy to patch up. Next, we added some retaining rope to the PVC rim to help hold the balloon in place. We also added a pull tab onto the balloon to help reposition it. And the retaining rope were lashed onto EMT support so that they could be slid up and down, adjusted if needed. So after the balloon was up, then we added a kind of a shelf or a rack to hold counterweight back. I ended up just using paver brick, and so that allowed fairly granular level of control for the counterweight. So it was kind of tricky boosting that up. I also discovered that the balloon would actually pop if the blower was left on. So what I did was made a out vent on near the bottom of the balloon and then clamped it open so that the blower could be left continually, because we didn't want to have to turn the blower off traction. Then also we added little guides to help the basket get placed correctly between the A-frame support so it would be guided to the right position. Also on the retaining ropes on the top, we made a little loop and taped it onto the top of the balloon so that the retaining ropes would not fall off. We had a few snags on the balloon, but we patched those up later. I also made a stand to help hold the basket at a neutral position so that the tarps could be put over it for storage at night. Also added a little utility rack at the side of at one side of the A-frame supports, and then this was a handy place to put clamps and tape and various other small tools, with the larger tools being stowed down at the base of the A-frame. And then we added safety lines, so just a screw eyelet on either side of the basket and some spring-loaded clips, and then the rope was attached to the base of the A-frame. So this allowed the basket to be kept in place while we were loading and unloading counterweight. And then the counterweight rack we loaded up. I figured out what the appropriate counterweight was to lift me so that I could do a solo test. And then for overnight storage, we just deflate the balloon and kind of encase it in cardboard, and then move the basket to a horizontal position, a neutral position halfway up, and then throw tarps over it. So that was a brief overview of the site construction process. Sorry there wasn't much detail there. On the next project I'll be more careful to take actual video. If you have any questions or want more information, just let me know. Thanks. Here, I think I want to just make a note of a couple of design issues. Just really minor things. First off, I use screw eyes on the corners and down at the bottom here. Those actually worked pretty good, except I noticed this one here. I don't know if it was like this before I put it in or after. It's got a little bit of a bend or a twist to it. That could have been because I was lifting straight up, or because I had the safety lines kind of hooked on the side there. So I'll just... that's an area that could be beefed up a little bit. Also, these pipe clamps worked well on the EMT. However, in that last windy day, the EMT did kind of rotate a little bit. So I'm thinking maybe a screw or something through the clamp and through the pipe, or something to hold it a little bit better so it doesn't twist would be helpful. That last windy day also kind of twisted up so the far piece of EMT is just rotated, but this closer one actually bent back a little bit. So looks like there was a fair amount of stress on that. There were no real structural problems, it just bent a little bit, so I suppose it could use a little bit heavier next time. What else? These guides for the final landing of the basket worked well, especially for solo mode. Let's see, oh yes, and then up here, the stabilizing cross piece, it looks like it's up just a tad, just a smidgen too high, because it actually bumps into the cross beam at the very top there. If I had lowered it, probably lowered the cross piece like another inch or so, that wouldn't have been an issue. It's really not an issue anyway, because I want the counterweight rack to tilt back like it is tilting. It just, I don't know, anytime there's contact that there doesn't need to be, it just seems like the design could be adjusted a little bit. Similarly, going the other direction, this cross member here, okay, so it hits the basket right here when the counterweight is all the way down. So I probably should have moved this cross member just another inch or two towards the center. That's only to help keep the counterweight frame, or the lifter, the U-frame in, keep it a little bit more rigid, so the exact placement doesn't matter, because the basket is actually holding the very ends. What else? Yes, I was going to, so this was the original counterweight I put on this for the basket before we had the balloon attached. I was going to remove that and replace it with just like probably 4 or 5 more bricks. That should be done, because it kind of looks a little hokey that way. I think that's pretty much it. Well, I suppose there's one other comment. So I reused some wood that had been used in previous years for other purposes here at the church. As such, a few of these pieces were a little bit warped, a little bit twisted. In general, I put the twists on in places where it did not matter. Like, for example, this very bottom piece, it didn't matter. But in this corner here, it is actually turned in just a little bit. Like I said, not a problem structurally. However, it did throw off my measurements just a little bit, because over on the front end, I had to, originally this edge was going to line up with this edge, but I ended up having to put an additional piece in here and then connect this to that and that to that. Just threw off the alignment just a little bit. Not a big deal, but just a little inconvenience during initial setup. Here's some of those metal plates that I used. Definitely don't want that joint to come apart. I also have metal plates, caps I guess, on the top of the A-frame, so you don't want those coming apart. I don't think they would anyway. I mean, I've got screws going into the sides, and the way the forces are, the weight is going down, which would tend to push the pieces together, not so much push them apart, I think. But anyway, it's just extra safety. And that's really about it. I think overall I was very happy with the design. It's very solid. I mean, it's wood, so it wiggles a little bit, but it's very solid. Okay.